for attending this workshop because unfortunately in so many situations, if there's a conference and there are 5 concurrent workshops, one being on male-female relationships and another one on African and African American history, one on education, another one on religion, and then the last workshop on economics. Unfortunately, if you had 1,000 participants at the conference, and ideally speaking, you'd have 200 people at each of those 5 workshops. Unfortunately, the economic workshop would be the least attended workshop. And yet, ironically, if you sat in on the workshop on male-female relationships, invariably they would begin to discuss the difficulties of proposing to someone or staying married with regards to economics and unemployment and inflation. The same thing would occur with African history in that our great scholars, Dr. Joseph Vinyo-Kanan, John Henry Clark, Chancellor Williams, and numerous others, we've always talked about the need to have funds available to develop a black research think tank that could have these brothers and sisters actually work in the think tank and be paid. But again, the lack of economic resources makes that very difficult. The same thing also applies to our churches. While they have a tremendous economic resource, if not managed properly, then they can implement the kind of programs that the community needs. And with regards to education, as we all know, we've been discussing for years the need for more after-school and Saturday cultural awareness programs, the need to build more independent black schools, and yet that requires, again, economics. So the other 4 workshops are going to discuss it, and yet, unfortunately, there seems to be a shyness and a hesitancy of attending the economic workshop. So I'm very glad that you attended this workshop. And I think most of us are becoming more and more aware that we may be the only race that believes that politicians and ministers are going to save us. You look at our community, and in some communities we have 1 and 2 churches on the same block, 2 and 3 churches in a 4-corner community. And we now have over 7,000 elected officials. We're the mayor of many of the major cities in this country, and yet African Americans are still catching hell. It is obvious that being the mayor of a city, being the superintendent of police, may not be the most effective way to secure power. I know in my own hometown, Chicago, many of our residents, African Americans, thought that with the election of Harold Washington, that the projects would come tumbling down, and that they could go down and talk to Harold sometime tomorrow morning and secure employment. As much as Harold wanted to do that, Harold Washington did not have the economic apparatus to implement the kinds of policies that he campaigned for. We have got to realize that economics lead politics. The joke in Chicago was that Arabs and Asians did not vote on election day. And the reason for that, they were too busy managing their businesses. And African Americans have to begin to do the same. While our workshop today is on economics, anybody who's heard me speak before knows that I believe that our number 1 problem is not economics. Some people would say that our number 1 problem is drugs. Some would say it's teen pregnancy. Others would say it's crime. Others would say it's education. And while we're going to give our workshop today on economics, I believe that even economics, along with the others, are simply symptoms of the much larger issue. And the larger issue is low self-esteem. I believe that if we felt better about ourselves, then there'd be less desire to use drugs. Research shows that when little girls have goals, when they have something to lose, they have less chance of becoming pregnant. When young men have something to do and feel good about themselves, they do not kill their brother and paint buildings up in terms of graffiti. And the same thing with regards to education. In my second bestseller, To Be Popular or Smart, our youth associate being smart with being white. It is obvious that a people that hate themselves would make that association. So while we're going to give this workshop on economics and the whole issue of unemployment, I still believe that our number one problem is low self-esteem. And even in this workshop, we're going to show the relationship between our economic problems and low self-esteem. Let's begin to delve into today's presentation on my latest book titled Black Economics and the New World Order. As you know, Western Europe has now become an organized bloc. The Trilateral Commission, primarily led by 290 men and 10 women, representing primarily the countries of the area of Western Europe and Japan and the United States. Their major objective is deindustrialization and deregulation. The concept is that IBM no longer wants to be restricted to the United States. General Motors, Coca-Cola no longer wants to be restricted to the United States. Mitsubishi, Sony no longer wants to be restricted to Japan. The concept is that these corporations want global power. The best way to do that is to deindustrialize various countries. In this case, in terms of as it affects us, America. What that means is that GM and U.S. Steel and other corporations, what they want to do is to find labor sources around the world where there is little or no union development, low and depressed wages. And so therefore the days are over with of a young brother or sister who barely has a high school diploma in the industrial belt of the Midwest securing an $18 an hour salary. GM, IBM, Ford wants to now move to Mexico City, to South Korea, to South Africa, and pay people 18 to 30 to 50 cents an hour. The New World Order. And unfortunately, Africans are not being respected at the table. The concept is if you don't produce anything, then there's no need for you to be invited. And so this New World Order is primarily Western Europe, Japan, and the United States literally carving up the world. This New World Order views the African-American community, the quote-unquote ghetto, the way they view a colony in Africa. And on page 3 of the book, some of the characteristics of a colony are almost identical to the characteristics portrayed in the African-American community. One, they have low per capita income, a high birth rate, high infant mortality rate, 4, a small, weak middle class, 5, low rate of capital formation and domestic savings, 6, an economy dependent on external markets, 7, the major export is labor, 8, a tremendous demand for products consumed by wealthier nations, 9, most of the land and businesses are owned by foreigners, and lastly, indigenous entrepreneurship is limited. A sad commentary in terms of the similarities between a colony and a ghetto. We need to ask ourselves, why were we brought to this country? This was the same question Sidney Wilhelm raised in the powerful book, Who Needs the Negro? We were brought to this country to work. Now we need to ask ourselves the subsequent question that the Trilateral Commission, the New World Order, is asking. Does that reason still exist today? The answer is no. America has a problem. What do they do with the people they no longer need? But remember, how you phrase the question determines the answer. The Negro question is, what are they going to do for us? The African question is, what are we going to do for ourselves? In 1910, 90% of African-American children had their fathers at home because African-American men were needed to work farms. In 1960, 80% of our children still had their fathers at home. America still needed us, industrialization, to work factories. But in 1992, in 1993, as we approached the year 2000, only 38% of our children have their fathers at home. We moved from the farm to the factory to the computer. There is a relationship between economics and family stability. We need to also that two significant factors are taking place within the African-American community. This widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. 25% of our race makes over $40,000. 1/3 of our race lives below the poverty line. We are not a monolithic people. there's a widening gap between the black haves and the black have-nots. This is commensurate with what goes on in the larger marketplace, where 1% of the population owns 37% of the economic resources, and 2% own more than 46% of the economic resources. The concern, though, in this widening gap between the black haves and the black have-nots is that in terms of this concept, black middle class, and I hate this term because, first of all, for many of them, if they miss one paycheck, they be out of that class and into another. You cannot be in a class off one paycheck. But the major concern is that the group that makes up the quote-unquote black middle class, many of them have skills but short on guts. 60% of the black middle class works for the government. 35% work for big business. Only 5% start their own business. You give a Negro a good job, and you can almost write them off of the liberation struggle. So for a portion of our community, they bought into a good job. Another portion of our community has bought into welfare. You give a Negro some welfare, and you can write them off from ever wanting to work again. And so we have to look at these two phenomena, the issue of a good job and quote-unquote good welfare. It goes back to the plantation and the house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro thought that he was free because he had a good job working in the master's house. The field Negro wanted more than a good job. He wanted freedom. This dialogue between Kunta Kinte and Fiddler in the movie Roots and the book Roots elaborates on this point. But unfortunately, for many of us that have received a good job, we seldom think about starting our own business. And it takes being laid off or fired from the job in order to even contemplate the notion of starting their own business. That's why I always advocate to college students, if you must work for somebody else, live for needs and invest the difference. That if you're making $25,000 or $30,000, try to live off maybe 75 or 80% of that and invest the difference. So if it ever comes a time where you want to leave or you are forced to leave, you now have capital available to invest in your business. Do you know what it's like having a BA and now an MBA from Harvard or Yale or the Wharton Business School, and here you are working for a Fortune 500 corporation, and you thought you were going to be the next VP or CEO, and now you have to train someone that does not look like you, of a lighter hue, to be your supervisor? It's enough to make a Negro turn black. It's enough to make a Negro who always wanted a good job to think about now starting their own business. The problem is, for many of us, the more we make, the more we spend. And so we were making 35 to 40, but living as if we had made 55 to 60. So now we're deep in debt. And it's very difficult to start your own business and pay yourself in the very first year $50,000 and $60,000. The same thing applies to welfare. It was never designed to empower people. It was designed to break people's spirits. This country is willing to give us $500 a month, combination AFDC and food stamps, times 12 months for $6,000. If you multiply 6,000 times 40 years, that's $240,000 not to work. Wouldn't it be better to give this person a $40,000 scholarship for college, and then if they graduate, $60,000 to either start their own business or to buy a house for a total budget of $100,000? As you can see, in this scenario, I could balance the budget sometime tonight. But it's obvious that balancing the budget, that looking at cost-effective strategies is not the agenda. The agenda is breaking spirits. There are numerous men and women have told me, I don't want welfare, I don't want AFDC, I don't mind working at McDonald's, but can I at least keep my green card? Can you at least provide child care while I work? What does America say? No. You work at McDonald's, you work anywhere, we're cutting off child care, cutting off your medical benefits. Again, those are the kind of policies that are affecting our country. But let's now begin to look at the African-American balance sheet. Let's first of all look at our assets, and then let's begin to look at our liabilities. In looking at our assets, the first one is that in the year of 1992, we will earn $360 billion. That makes us the 9th wealthiest nation in the world. We have 40 million African Americans in this country. They count about 30, 32. As we all know, they're always undercounted. We have 4 million acres of land. It used to be more. It used to be about 16 million. But we still have 4 million, an adequate amount in order to build a nation. 85% of African Americans live in the largest 30 markets in America. You sort of look at where the major league teams play, and that's where African Americans reside, primarily because of industrialization. So it's not going to be difficult reaching us because we're primarily in the 30 largest cities in America. We also only have 2 million African Americans with college degrees. There are more African Americans with degrees in America than any other country in the world. Those are just some of our assets. Now, looking at our liabilities, we're approximately 15% of the population, but we only earn 6% of the income. We only possess 3% of the wealth. 83% of our businesses have no employees. Average sales are only $11,400. We only secure 3% of all business receipts. As I mentioned earlier, one-third of our people live below the poverty line, and 1/2 of our children. 25% of all adults are unemployed, and 60% of African American youth are also unemployed. In terms of business development, of every 1,000 African Americans, only 9 of us start a business. For whites, it's 64. For Asians, it's 96. And for Arabs, it's 108. And in terms of our failure rate, in the first 3 years, 30% of all African American businesses fail. At the end of 5 years, it's 75%. At the end of 10 years, it's 80%. 93% of our monies we spend outside of the African American community. The biggest boycott is the black consumer on the black business. We buy 31% of all cosmetics, primarily this good hair, pretty eyes, and the color of our skin syndrome. We buy 38% of the cigarettes, 39% of the alcohol, 40% of all records and movies. Remember this concept that we were not a full person, that we were 3/5. That scenario is still played out as it relates to median income, because in the past 25 years, our median income has fluctuated between 57% and 61% of white income. Isn't it ironic? 60%, 61% as it relates to 3/5 of a person. And lastly, because of our income only being 6% of the income of the entire population, when it should be at least 15%, then there's a $127 billion deficit in terms of monies that we should have access to if we were paid in the same ratio of other groups in America. What I now want to do, now that we've reviewed our assets and our liabilities as it relates to African Americans as a people, is to now look at the micro perspective. I think so many times in economic workshops, many of us sometimes are overwhelmed by the figures. The figures seem to be at a distance. And so what I like to do here is to make economics real. I like to go into your house. I like to now go into your checkbook. I like to go into your budget and begin to look at the micro issues as it relates to black economics. The first one I think we need to look at is that so many times we hear the figure of $300 billion or $360 billion, and for many of us that figure is incomprehensible. And so I think what we need to do is to break this $360 billion down and look at what we as individuals are doing as it relates to the entire race. You see, if 93% of the race is spending money outside the black community, what we need to do is see how that relates to us individually. And the first thing I'd like for you to do is to develop a budget. And within the budget, you need to look at your projected budget, and then on a weekly or monthly basis, look at the actual budget. There could be a difference between what you projected for the month and what you actually spent. Secondly, I'd like for you to list all the items that you buy in the month, and I'd like for you to place next to those whether it was a need or a want. Many of us confuse these two, and that may be the reason why we're so deeply in debt, because we have convinced ourselves that we need a Cadillac, and we need a BMW, and we need a Mercedes. I've always marveled at how in low-income areas you see more expensive cars there than you see in affluent suburbs. People with low self-esteem feel that they have to replace self-esteem with material esteem, and so therefore their entire income is either on their back, or they're driving in it, or it's within their home. Unfortunately, for many African Americans, whatever we make, we're spending, and it's in ways that are not always that make the best economic sense. The third thing I'd like for you to do on your budget is to list whether the items that you bought were from an African American store or a non-black store. You notice how we're going to use different terms here, non-black, which would include white and Asians and Arabs and foreign businesses. So many of us would be greatly surprised at the amount of money we individually spend with foreign businesses, non-black businesses versus white. At the same time, we have to also be fair. I'm in no way projecting and espousing that African Americans should spend all $360 billion with African Americans. In the book, we point out that when you look at certain major industries, for example, the utilities industry, we don't control or provide resources in the area of telephone or gas or electricity. In terms of transportation, if a person is going to take public transportation, we don't provide that. There are numerous products that if a person wanted a particular item, the African Americans may not produce it nor distribute it. And so this desire to spend more money within the African American community has to be within limits. And later on, we'll also, of course, discuss those items that African Americans do sell, but may sell at higher prices, which again is offensive to many African American consumers who are contemplating purchasing from them. But the main thing is for us to sort of look at ourselves individually and to see what we are doing as it relates to expenditures. The next area I want to look at from a micro perspective is that I'm recommending that all of us realize that shopping stores are designed in such a way to take advantage of impulse purchases. Numerous studies point out that 60% of purchases made in a store, the consumer had no idea they were going to make that decision until they were actually in the store, which is why it behooves all of us to have a shopping list. And if at all possible, adhere to it. Of course, you can have a list and not use it or still be affected by the design of the store. And as you know, stores are designed in such a way where as you get closer to the checkout line, the items decrease in price. They begin to have all types of sales, hoping that people won't really make a real conscious decision about something that costs below $5. And that's where impulse buying really is significant. The next area that we want to look at in terms of individual economics would be this whole concept of a sale. Many people convince themselves, convince their spouse that they really save money because I bought it on sale. The concern we want to express here is that if you had no intention of buying a dress or a suit, and you go into a store and you see the dress or the suit was originally priced at $400 and now it's on sale for $200 to $300, well, at one level you can convince yourself and your spouse that you save $100 to $200, but in actuality you spent $200 to $300 that you had no intention of spending, but they used the almighty word sale. And I've noticed that many stores will say half off, and what many consumers are not aware of is that the night before they had marked it up, And of course, it's half off today, but only after they had increased the price the previous day. So we need to be conscious of the word sale. And a sale, in my opinion, is not a sale unless you intended to buy the item. That's when it's beneficial to you. To buy something that you had no intention really is not a sale. We need to also become more cognizant of credit cards. Many people really do think that credit cards are not money. They think that's something that you simply use down the road, and yet it's actually money that you will use to repay it. We need to operate, first of all, that credit cards, I like to call them convenience cards, and that what we will do is that we will take advantage of the privilege of not having cash or a check, and we will use a credit card for a purchase made on the 10th of the month. But at the end of 30 days, we will pay the entire balance. In this way, you use the card for convenience. You didn't have your checkbook or the available cash for that particular purchase, but you paid the entire item off. In this way, you are not charged any interest. Now, before I go on, I can't stress enough how significant the interest is. If, for many of us, we don't even look at the statements carefully, and we may see a figure like 1.5% interest a month, and we may think that's insignificant. But 1.5 a month is 18% a year. And when you're looking at 1.8%, then you're now looking at 21 to 22% interest a year. This is very significant. This is almost like a charlatan. This is almost like gangsterism, where credit card companies are literally gouging us at 18 to 22% interest, and some are higher than that. That's like a loan shark. And so we also would recommend that you shop around for credit cards. For example, in the state of Arkansas, credit cards there literally are about 2 to 3% above prime. So that in our present economic arrangements, if other companies are charging 1.5 to 1.8% a month, or 18 to 22 for the year, Arkansas would be somewhere around 7.5 to 9%. And so it becomes imperative that you shop around to get the lowest interest rate, but it also, I think, is something to consider, and that's to see if you can pay it off in full. Now, there's no question. If there's an item, a large ticket item, something that costs $1,000 to $2,000, that many times we put it on a credit card because that would be the only way to purchase it. Even though I really respect the leadership of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that took the position that if you can't pay for it in full, wait. Many of us simply have lived beyond our means. I know that's a very extreme statement of you should not purchase it unless you can pay for it. And of course, my argument goes out the window if we're talking about a house or a car, because most persons are simply not in a position to pay for a $100,000 house or a $30,000 car. But it is important that we all begin to think about reducing our credit liability and to consider using the credit card as a convenience card. The next area that I want to look at is insurance. I'm real concerned about some of these salespersons in our community and the kinds of presentations they're making to our people as it relates to insurance. The first point I want to establish here is that insurance is a necessary tool while you are developing your estate and you have dependents, primarily children, that are dependent on you, and while your estate is still growing, that you may not be in a position to provide for their needs if something happened to you. Now, if we understand that that is the role of insurance, then several points we need to consider. The first one is that in our income-producing years, we are trying to develop an estate so that at some point we will not need insurance because our estate will be able to respond. Number two, insurance is necessary while we have dependents. As our children become older, when our children leave, therefore we have little to no dependents. Number three, we should never link an insurance concept with an investment concept. If you want insurance, that's what you buy. If you want an investment instrument, a mutual fund, common